Okay. Did
My
you
name
have
is
an
Eric
outline for this one?
Straczynski.
Or
All right. You're like, okay. My name is Eric Straczynski. Stop. Okay.
Look.
Oh, no. Now we've riled up the animals. My name is Eric Straczynski.
Precious.
God.
All right.
All right, for real now this time.
Okay.
I won't even look.
My name is Eric Straczynski, and you're listening to episode number 11 of Gut Reactions. All right, so I'm back with the hosts of Everything Trying to Kill You, Mary Kay McBrayer and Maegan Brooks. Mary Kay is a belly dancer, horror enthusiast, sideshow lover, prose writer, Christian, and literature professor from south of Atlanta. Mary Kay is also the creative nonfiction editor for Madcap Review, a semi-annual online journal of art and literature. She's currently working on her first full-length novel about America's actual first female serial killer, but until then, you can read her essays at the Santa Fe Writers Project Quarterly, Book Riot, and the Blue Shift Journal. Maegan is a longtime lover of horror, true crime, and the strange. As well, she is an avid dancer, fast car enthusiast, thrill seeker, craft beer connoisseur, and self-proclaimed nerd. But by day, she is a behavior specialist in Atlanta, Georgia, with a background in clinical psychology. Her research focuses on the function of human behavior, aka why people do the weird things they do. She's known to psychologically overanalyze every movie ever made. On the last episode, if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to it, or none of this is going to make any sense. So I left off saying I was going to talk about what I had watched, and that would kind of spring us into our conversation. I watched, at the recommendation of Maegan and Mary Kay, I watched Silence of the Lambs for the first time.
We're interviewing all the serial killers now in custody for a psychobehavioral profile. Could be a real help in unsolved cases. You spook easily, Starling?
Not yet, sir.
I want you to go after him again today in the asylum.
And who's the subject?
The psychiatrist, Hannibal Lecter.
Cannibal the cannibal.
Busy hunting that new one, Buffalo Bill. What a naughty boy he is. Do you know why he's called Buffalo Bill?
This one likes to skin his humps. Most serial killers keep some sort of trophies from their victims.
I didn't.
No.
No, you ate yours.
I'll help you catch him, Clary.
Tell me what you see.
He's got real physical strength, combined with an older man's self-control. He's cautious, precise, and he's never impulsive. He'll never stop.
Oh, Clarice, your problem is you need to get more fun out of life.
Believe me, you don't want Hannibal Lecter inside your head.
What did you see, Clarice? What did you see? Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock.
Yeah.
It's perfect if you loved it.
It's my
It
jam.
is perfect in every way. It's the first time I've sat that I can remember in the past couple years where I've actually sat on the edge of my seat the entire time because it was so like tense and like you're like, what's happening? Are they going to get to this in time? And the movie just played me like crazy the whole time. It was really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
I want to watch it one more time before I say this, or I'm going to say it right now. I want to watch it one more time before I say this definitively.
Do it.
It might be my number 2 movie of all time because I was looking.
Wow.
I was looking at my list of movies. It's right there with The Shining for me. I think if I watch it again, it still has the same effect where I'm like, because it mesmerized me the same way. Really interesting. And it may be in my number 2, number 3. It doesn't touch Full Metal Jacket yet for me. That movie's just like a whole different level for me.
Understandable.
And is a horror movie, by the way.
It
I want
is.
to do an episode about that. So anyway, it's up there. It's really, really good. It was funny. I was at work today, and I told my coworker who likes a lot of horror movies, I was like, yeah, I just watched Silence of the Lambs for the first time. And she's like, what's the name of the guy in it? I was like, Anthony Hopkins. She's like, oh, yeah. And she like turned around to my cubicle and was like, I was like, oh, stop. That's the worst.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
The other day, my friend did something nice for me, and I said, people will say we're in love. Because that's what
Yeah.
Lecter says to Clarice. She's like, no, I came from miles south.
I gave
People will
myself.
say we're in love.
That's awesome.
He was like, people already tell me that I love you. And I'm like, oh, it was from, you missed the
Never
joke.
mind, you ruined everything.
I will break this window. You don't get my jokes. Anyway, anytime I can drop that in casual conversation, just any line
Yeah.
from any of that movie, I'm into.
I'm waiting now for next time my wife asks me to grab lotion. I'm definitely bringing it out in a basket.
Now he places the lotion in the basket.
It was a really, really good movie. I'll probably end up doing an episode just about that movie.
You should.
Oh, yeah.
But really, really solid. It was funny because at the end, with what happens near the end and the scenario that our characters are in, my wife kept leaning over. She's like, "Did you lock the door? Did you lock our door?" And I was like, "Stop it! It's like a movie. Like, stop. The odds of this happening to us right now as we're watching Silence of the Lambs is very, very low."
But it's not entirely impossible.
The world is far more interesting with her in it.
It's true.
Okay. So, very,
That's what he tells
very
her.
good.
Nobody caught. I got you, Mary Kay.
Obviously, Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill's character is super influenced by a pretty nasty fellow named Ed Gein. Ed Gein lived in Wisconsin in the 60s, 50s.
I think earlier than that. I think he was in the
I think it was
the
50s.
I think that's when they caught him.
Okay, so
Because I remember writing it down and being like, oh, I thought it was way later.
Well, it would have had to have been the
they
50s
just didn't have
because
any
Psycho
media
came out
coverage.
in 1960 with
Hey,
influences
or-
from him.
Right.
wait, 1960.
Bet
Hold
you
on, you
$20
just
right now.
blew-
You can
I don't-
PayPal it
I-
to me. 1960.
Hold on, stop it.
I'm
Is
never.
it
I'm
really?
never wrong with movie dates.
Yeah, Hitchcock Psycho
Uh-huh.
is in 1960.
Yeah, it is. 1968 is Night of the Living Dead. Son of a gun. Okay. All right. Well,
I'll be looking out for that PayPal payment.
But yeah, I was shocked that it was that early too, because I wrote it down with like an exclamation point
It's been
and a
done.
question mark,
Okay, so-
and then I thought it was later. Yeah.
so I just Facebook page you.
saw
So
Oh
I'm a
my
man.
gosh! Don't make me push receive money.
You better go ahead and do it before he cancels.
Do it.
No.
So Ed Gein grew up. Long story short, was a bit of a mama's boy. Had a pretty interesting relationship with his mom, who was pretty fanatical, religious, crazy person. He had a little bit of gender confusion that was
These are
put
all
on him.
understatements, by the way.
That's putting it mildly, 007.
She wanted him to be a little girl, and so she sexually abused him.
Yeah, and so he did what any rational human being would do and began killing women, skinning them, and wearing their skin over himself, much like Buffalo Bill. So I want to approach this from a couple different ways. I don't want to spend too much time just getting into nitty gritty. I'll put in the show notes a link to a couple things to watch for people that want to know specifics of the story. Mary Kay, from your perspective as an author, what would lead to kind of the fictional interest? Like Hitchcock was fascinated by this story.
Anthony Boucher says this book, Psycho, by Robert Bloch, is fiendishly entertaining.
Sounds ghastly. Everyone in town's already passed.
And who's everyone, pray?
Well, the story department finished the coverage this morning.
This is about Ed Gein, the mass murderer from Wisconsin. Oh, yeah. Graphic elements of brutal violence, voyeurism, transvestitism, and incest. Very nice. Not your average run-of-the-mill nutcase, is it, here?
You're kidding.
Peggy, this is the boy who dug up his own mother.
Obviously, the writers of Silence of the Lamb. You have Toby Hooper influenced by the story, bringing it to back to that kind of small town in the middle of nowhere, really playing up the skin angle of it.
Right.
I want to approach two things. One, what's the literary fascination with this story? Why is this, out of all these stories, the one that's been picked so many times and returned to and still never really done completely faithfully? I think Silence of the Lambs might be the most faithful interpretation of it that I've seen, even though it's set in a modern day setting. But then also, Maegan, I want to know from someone with a background in behavioral study, what possesses people to be so fascinated with the true account we could probably talk all day about the things that would lead someone to do the things Ed Gein did, but why is it that people, myself included, why was I so interested to say, what did his house really look like? How they said, I need to see pictures of this crime scene. Why, why are we fascinated with the way Ed Gein looked and talked and acted? I'll go ahead and start with you, Mary Kay, from a literary perspective. Why is this story picked so much by so many different authors?
The main three, right, retellings of Ed Gein's story are Psycho, which is 1960, that's Hitchcock. Texas Chainsaw Massacre in, help me, Maegan, 76.
1974.
And then Silence of the Lambs, I think that was 1991.
91.
Or 91.
91.
91, okay. So we have like significant time passing between them. And so the actual crime happened sometime after his mother's death, they think. Because it was the 50s and this was like, your Cleaver era perfect family type thing, none of it was covered in the media. It couldn't have been because it was too much for like a normal person to see or hear. And you even had like in one of the documentaries that we watched for this, they had like Ed Gein jokes as like a subgenre because nobody knew how to handle it, right? Like it was just too much for like any person to process. And I was thinking about like, and I rewatched Psycho as well because Norman Bates is like a regular dude. Like he's just like pretty innocuous looking until you find out that he is maybe pretending that he's his mother. He has some gender confusion. And I was thinking about too, like in the 60s, you weren't allowed to have gender confusion. That wasn't a thing that people would have understood.
Sure.
That wasn't a thing that anyone would have recognized as anything but crazy and horrific at the time. We didn't have the language for it. Maegan, what was going on like in the 60s psychologically?
Everything.
Am I right?
Yeah, but I mean,
okay.
No, and it's a joke, but it's also not a joke in the 60s. Like in the 60s, mental health care was still in shambles. It was still in disarray. You would still a manic woman if you had problems. We weren't shedding a whole lot of light. A lot of our common mental illnesses and others like special needs disorders that we see now, like even things as simple as like autism, they didn't exist in the 60s. So everybody was just frantic, and anything that was different or outside of what was considered the pretty box norm in the 60s was just kind of pegged as need, with a need to be suppressed. There was a whole lot going on. And now you're also adding in people are starting to politically change and become a little bit more politically open. So there's a whole lot of dichotomy in people being shoved back into this box, but also trying to break out of the box, which I think we see a lot of in these movies from the 60s.
With Psycho, it does, even the title, right, is about like his mental illness mostly. Like she gets killed, but there's no like eating of flesh. There's no wearing of women's flesh. He just puts a wig on in his mom's clothes. Right.
Matricide is probably the most unbearable crime of all. Most unbearable to the son who commits it. So he had to erase the crime, at least in his own mind. He stole her corpse. A weighted coffin was buried. He hid the body in the fruit cellar. Even treated it to keep it as well as it would keep. And that still wasn't enough. She was there, but she was a corpse. So he began to think and speak for her. Give her half his life, so to speak. At times, he could be both personalities, carry on conversations. At other times, the mother half took over completely. Now, he was never all Norman, but he was often only mother.
And then you have Texas Chainsaw Massacre next in 76.
I think it's 74.
74.
Oh, I was right. 74.
74.
I was right the first time. Shut.
So mid-70s, Texas Chainsaw Massacre comes out, and it doesn't really do anything with psychology at all.
No.
Like, it doesn't even touch on that. All of the...
Okay.
I
would...
It's not the main focus.
It's not
of
the
the
main focus, but
like,
I would argue
like,
they don't have
bones. We have photographs of these scenes. We have, like, the cooler that the girl is in. She's put on... Pam is put on a meat hook, but one of Ed Gein's victims that ran that... the bar, she was found on a meat hook as well, but she was butchered as though she was an animal, which was not the case with what happened in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But then she couldn't watch her boyfriend be butchered, so it was a trade-off for the rewriting of it, right? Like you had to have the sensational scenes, like some character development where they're together and they care a lot about each other. But yeah, so we have like more of the crime scene photography. In particular, like they have the family at dinner, right? So that's the part of Ed Gein that they're taking is like the body horror for Texas Chainsaw. You have like the cups made from the skulls, all of like the trophies sort of from all of their kills.
So Psycho, I think, more closely understands the mental side of why he's trying to fill the void that he has or feels he has in his life.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
But I think Texas Chainsaw, when you look at the crime scene photos from Ed Gein's house, Texas Chainsaw is not far off. Like, there were masks that looked
it's very similar.
Just like that. And it actually enhances. Texas Chainsaw is already a scary movie, but then when you see it and think, that looks exactly like the mask Ed Gein made, it takes it to the next level.
And then we still have, though, the gender dysmorphia with Leatherface, right? Because he's dressed as the wife or the mom or the maternal figure.
Yeah.
I don't know. The goals of those two retellings are really different, I think. Like, they're both scary. They're both trying to scare you, but they're using different methods to do it.
Yeah. I think what's interesting, and I brought this up in the messages, is that just the role, and I haven't had time to really digest, bad choice of words, I haven't had time to digest the movie about the cannibal, but I haven't had time to digest Silence of the Lambs 100% yet, because that movie just kind of, I was so in it that I haven't had time to like analyze it. But so Psycho, it's very much a place of sexual guilt. So it's him playing his mother figure, who's a matriarch. So he's almost empowered in becoming his mother. It's not so much about becoming a woman in general. It's just about becoming the maternal matriarchal figure.
The head of the family, kind of.
And then Texas Chainsaw, what Tobe Hooper went out, is he's got a very strong patriarchal household. So Leatherface, when he's in the home, is very much this... a maternal figure, but he's very much putting himself in a place of abuse for the patriarchal figure of the family. But then when he gets his chainsaw, that's when he's empowered. When the chainsaw doesn't work, he's impotent. You know what I mean? Like the metaphor is very on the nose. You're too busy being scared in the first one to notice it. But then when you get into Chainsaw 2, Tobe Hooper's like, that's what it is. Like everything he does is meant to be this sexual gesture. But again, going from a literary perspective, you can go back and pick so many things from Ed Gein's story that don't really make sense unless you're crazy. I mean,
and that's like the benefit of telling it fictionally, right? Is like you can have the nice bow at the end where everything comes together. This is why this happened, like direct correlative causal relationship, and that's not how it works. I'm wondering if the reason that Ed Gein's story has been so retrod is because it's scary when a villain masquerades as a victim, and yet it's so often in these stories done through the gender roles. So like you have like your giant powerful man in not in Psycho so much, he's just like a regular man, which in the 60s is like enough,
I'm a dude.
And then you have like you're a dude. You get to be empowered. But it's changing now, of course. But it gets a little bit different every generation. But so you have Leatherface, which is huge. Like you watch him carry Pam with like one hand and like
as
regrip and everything is like no problem as she's thrashing. Right.
He doesn't blink
but he
at all.
Puts on the woman's mask, and then you see him like abused as well, and it's like, but you're also the bad guy though. Like you don't get out of being the bad guy just because you were a victim first. And then you see that with Buffalo Bill too. They did not call it LGBTQ at the time. Like Lecter's terminology was something different. I can't remember what it was.
What's odd about Silence of the Lambs, and maybe that's what you're getting toward, is that Hannibal Lecter, he said something in channel, and this is one of the reasons I want to rewatch it is see exactly what he's getting at. He said something along the lines of, he thinks he wants to be a woman, but he said, much like he thought he needs to be a million other things before that.
Billy is not a real transsexual, but he thinks he is. He tries to be. He's tried to be a lot of things, I expect.
I thought that was interesting. They did, because they didn't really explain it. Because she brings up, she says, well, people that are, transsexual are typically very underspoken and very... And he says, and then that's when he says,
peaceful people. That's what she said.
And because they're typically in the position of abuse. And then so when he switched around and says, well, he's not really one of them, I was like, so what is he? And I think that's one of the things that's scary about that movie is they don't really explain what Buffalo Bill is. He's just out there. I mean, unless you probably are like, yes, I do know what he is. But that's why I'm curious.
Well, I think Maegan probably does because, it's advanced. Our psychology has advanced so far. I mean, like 27 years right? Since this movie
Yeah.
came out. And then that's another scary thing about, like, this is another scary facet, is that Hannibal Lecter is also your mentor and also a serial killer.
Yeah. That's the only people that can truly understand these kind of situations, though. And that's the thing is, even no matter how invested you get into it, you're never going to, the only person that will ever understand what they did is Ed Gein, or, you know what I mean? Like, and even those people might not understand.
Yeah.
And I know we're jumping around, but this is kind of exactly the conversation I wanted to have about it, because I think this is the way to hit a million issues is with, say, Ed Gein, he admired the woman's figure. He coveted, to use Silence of the Lambs terminology, but yet he's destroying what he wants in the pursuit of it.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's a poetic nature to that of, you can never truly have, you know what I mean, that forbidden fruit without destroying yourself or others getting to it. And the minute he cuts off their skin, it becomes ugly. So he's going to constantly improve this process to harvest it better. It's to love something and then to destroy it, to try to appropriate it for yourself. There's so much there to unpack, and there's so much from a psychological perspective where most people, when you notice someone is beautiful, you say, wow, they're really beautiful. They're like, look at the structure of their face, look at the color of their eyes. But to go to another level and say, I need that on myself, for myself.
And they can't have it.
And to some extent, you understand that, because we've all had that. We've always said, I wish I looked like them, or I wish I had this. But what is that missing piece that makes you act on that and pursue it? You know what I mean? That's what's fascinating to me.
We see it a lot in Silence of the Lambs, maybe not necessarily with Buffalo Bill, but we see it with Hannibal Lecter. Like, it stems from trauma.
Yeah.
We see it a little bit, especially with Ed Gein, all of this kind of stems from trauma. And psychologically speaking, there's a lot of traits that people have that could easily make that switch flip to do these horrible, terrible things. Some people's switches are easier to flip than others.
Sure.
And what we've kind of seen over the years, especially in the last 15, 20 years with trauma research, is that trauma is one of the biggest factors in flipping that kind of switch. So, there's a whole saying that everybody is capable of evil,
Sure.
under the right circumstances. And we don't get too much backstory in Buffalo Bill as to why he is the way he is, but also I can imagine that if he is struggling gender-wise in this time period, like Mary said, this is not an acceptable time to be struggling with these. And who knows, maybe he did struggle with something else, and there's a lot to be said for mental illness, and it sounds like he was untreated, kind of is the way things go.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think this is a lot of just me maybe rambling to kind of hash it out.
That's perfect.
Myself, but yeah, so it sounds like a lot of untreated mental illness, and I really do wish that we got a little bit more of his backstory to kind of the why he is doing what he's doing. And this is what I said. This is me psychologically looking for those functions of behavior. So what exactly was our point A to get us to this point B?
One thing that's frustrating, I think, in a trend I've noticed with especially Psycho. I listen to a lot of horror podcasts and discussions. There's a lot of controversy about that ending scene. I don't know if you've ever heard, but they're sitting down and they're saying, oh, he's a transvestite. And people are saying, well, how dated the movie is to go into this long conversation about it. So when they did Bates Motel, one thing that they decided to do at the ending was not have him in mother's clothes, because they felt it would be insensitive to people that are transgendered or
the current climate.
Yeah. Okay. So I understand from a decision of keeping a mainstream network show where no one's going to be offended by it. But the thing a lot of people miss in Hitchcock's Psycho or in Buffalo Bill, in Silence of the Lambs or Texas Chainsaw, it's not sexual confusion that's portrayed as that's why they're crazy. The whole point is he thinks he's his, Psycho, he thinks he's his mom. In Ed Gein's case, he thinks he's becoming a woman by killing, you know what I mean? And when you get into Texas Chainsaw, he's wearing people's face, you know what I mean? I think it's important, and this is why I like having these discussions, is I think a lot of people either avoid these kind of discussions about it because it's hard to say okay, what exactly, whatever worldview I'm coming at this from, how do we approach a discussion about how should Ed Gein have been handled? You know what I mean? If Ed Gein was in a situation where people noticed, because people noticed in the documentary I was watching, he was off a little bit in high school. He had some issues going on. His family realized something was wrong. The only one that was kind of willingly ignorant was his own mother, because I think she held a lot of power and she liked it. I think it's interesting to talk about, how do you address a young Ed Gein?
The big thing with Ed Gein is that, he was at the local bars. He babysat people's kids. He was a friend. He was really active in his community.
Yeah.
Nobody ever expected this necessarily of him. And then everything came out, and there was a lot of shock that this was him. And there was also a lot of almost denial about it. Like, he was such a great guy. It's so hard to believe this. And we see this now, I think, unrelated to these topics. But when news articles come up and, horrible things happen, and people are like, it's so hard to believe that this person did that. They were an active member in the
He
church.
was a rapist.
They were
He was this. Yeah, it's.
But those people definitely exist. The people that kind of hide in plain sight, I guess, for lack of a better term, they kind of mask what's going on. But these people that are not likely suspects.
And then you see Ed Gein's picture, and you're like, that looks like what I think a serial killer would look like.
Oh, absolutely.
When I see his
Without a
picture,
doubt.
I just thought he looked like a country boy. Actually, I was like,
I don't know.
he looks
He
normal.
has dead
I don't
eyes to
know.
me. There's something about his eyes.
But there was no video. I feel like you can't tell there's nothing behind the
Yeah, I
eyes when there's
can.
no
Look
video.
at him glazed
You can-
over.
Oh, I
at
can't.
one. There's a very
he has.
specific
He literally
picture
has.
I'm
He has the one
referencing.
eye that droops a little bit. He's got that grimace. He's got the 5 o'clock shadow.
Yeah.
Like the greased back hair, the plaid. He looks like,
There's
if
the
you're
one
like,
where he's wearing like the plaid little, like, not a baseball hat, but like a plaid hat, and he's just looking
Yeah.
directly at the camera, but like it's void of everything.
yeah, no, he's a weird looking dude.
He's chilly. Let me tell you why the fact that these killers were based on Ed Gein makes these particularly scary movies.
Please do that.
Let me tell you, because it almost adds that tagline of based on a true story in front of it. Even though the films aren't based on a true story, part of it is based on a true story. And I can watch a movie a million times and it not scare me. The second time the opening scene says based on a true story, I'm now 10 times more intrigued, and I'm 10 times more involved, and I'm 10 times more likely to get scared.
See, I'm almost the opposite. Like, I'm so numb to horror marketing that, like, when I see based on true story, I'm like, okay, like, this is like the least.
Well, I think that's why I like that they didn't even add anything about it being based on him. But being a fan of all of, the genre and all that it entails, true crime to the campiest of 80s slashers, I knew, that it was based on Gein. So they didn't have to add the tagline.
Well, what's amazing too is that there's still a lot of people that believe Texas Chainsaw is a real story. Like, I was listening to an interview when the remake came out. Like, there's a whole bunch of people that will see that, and that's forever there. They'll be like, yeah, they changed the name, but it was Ed Gein, and that's exactly what I'm like.
That's exactly what happened.
He was in Wisconsin, so the Texas Chainsaw Massacre took a little liberty, but yeah, it's really interesting. I do have a question I want to ask, but Mary Kay, I'll let you. I think you had something you wanted to throw in really quick.
Yeah, I was just going to build on what you were saying again about the based on a true story thing. Whenever I see that, as far as narrative goes, I'm like, oh, this is like a jazzed up, hammed up version of something that really happened to someone somewhere.
Yeah.
And these retellings are the opposite, because the real story is way worse.
Oh, I'm sure.
It is.
It
It's
always
way worse.
is.
It's like the worst parts of each of these movies all together. I've grown to underestimate that, I guess.
Sure.
As a narrative thing. And then also, like, these films happen once every 20 years, basically. Like, so in the pattern, we should have had one, like, 8 or 9 years ago. But that's when, like, the true crime fascination was allowed to happen. So we don't need a fictional retelling anymore. Like, we can
have
know
the real story
stories
now.
Yeah. So we've talked about a little bit about the psychology of what leads someone to do the things that Ed Gein did. So what's wrong with you people that enjoy? You're like, that's an episode. That enjoy true crime stories. Now, I don't have a moral high ground against it. I just have never. I've always been like,
it's
I
not for
just never
everybody.
interested
You love it
me.
or you don't.
Why so passionate about true crime?
I don't know. I think part of it is it's almost like a car wreck. You just can't look away no matter how bad it is. And I think the other part is just as human beings, we're curious and we're kind of nosy. I think just as humans in general, we're just kind of fascinated by the curious and the strange. And some of us are just more willing to get into the grimy details than others. I don't have a good answer. I don't know. But I've always been fascinated by it. If you know, let me know why I'm weird.
Well, you're the one that's most qualified in this discussion. I thought you'd have the good answer.
That's true. That's so true. I think the reason that I am interested in true crime is because for a second I did some service in mental health and immediately could not handle it. Like I couldn't separate it from my like personal life. It was just too impactful for me. And so like since then I've been like, yes, tell me everything so I can avoid it. Like, and I'm pretty confident, like that's why like I carry my keys like Wolverine when I'm headed to my car. Like I'm doing all of the precautions that everyone has ever told me to do.
Sure.
And I think there's some sort of peace in knowing that like you can't really prevent it, but if you're doing everything you can, like if you're being mindful, if you're being watchful, if you're watching out for other people, like even though you can't, there's nothing you can really do to prevent. And of course, like a victim is never to blame, but just knowing that gives you some peace of mind, just like existing in the world.
There's a fascination with turning the lights on something that's usually kind of scary and hidden. Because I think that's the reason I enjoy fictional horror is fiction is an outlet, you know what I mean, escape. So I think when you're able to watch, say, Nightmare on Elm Street, for example, when you're watching those movies as a teenager and you're saying, oh, I'm struggling with something that it feels like no authority figure understands. You know, when you watch Nightmare on Elm Street 3, that's what that movie's about. You know what I mean? Like that's something where those movies dealt with suicide, abuse, alcoholism, but they dealt with it in a way where you're like, I'm in here to watch Freddy Krueger, but it's shedding light on what I'm really scared of, which might be a sibling or a coach or a parental figure. Absolutely. You know what I mean? And so I guess you just said kind of makes me think, okay, it's turning the lights on what's so scary about, you know, that creepy neighbor that I've passed 4 times. You know what I mean? Like it's a way to kind of deal with these people exist. The more I know about them, the less I have to, you know what I mean?
Fear of them.
Or I think some people the people that are turned off by it might be the people that read it and then start thinking, what if that's my neighbor? You know what I mean? Or you know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
Like there's probably
it makes them
that
far
split.
too anxious. They don't.
Yeah. Do you feel that effect at all? That you get more anxious with studying, or is it just kind of something where you feel the opposite, where it kind of?
I don't. But like I said, I'm not easy to startle. I'm not really easy to scare. I've never been one to like have my heart race, my heartbeat like quicken when I'm listening to true crime or reading the details. I think I look at it in a very clinical way, maybe, because I used to want to do like forensic psychology and things like that.
You look at things in a clinical way. I don't understand why that is.
Well, I mean, it's life. It happens. Life gets really dark and grimy sometimes, and I don't think we should hide from the dark details of things. I think the more we try to cover up things like we used to do in the past, where a lot of like these true crime details weren't really public, that definitely just made things worse. And like Mary Kay said, it also didn't really bring light that maybe if it's midnight and you're home alone, like don't open your door. If you're not expecting somebody, don't go to it.
Don't help Buffalo Bill load the couch in the van. Why would you get in that van?
Why would you do that? And why would you back into it where you have no escape? That's a story for another day.
The victim might
also never go into a room without 2 exits.
Nope, never.
True story.
True story.
True crime.
True crime story.
That was not a segue. So I'll wrap it up on this note because I've already kept you guys for 30 minutes longer than I was supposed to.
It happens.
You knew deep down this would happen.
I tried to warn you.
You helped me load the podcast couch into the van, and now you're trapped. You know what? You guys probably feel like Jodie Foster listening to this madman ramble on behind his cell. Except for it's just a Google Hangout. I'm just like, tell me something about what you think, and then I'll tell you something that I think.
Quid pro
quo. Blah, blah, blah. I can't, whatever.
I can't do it either. I messed it up the first time.
I got to do that little noise. Anyway, my last question to close out this episode is, even though I'm sure this conversation will carry on for the next 2 or 3 days as I send countless audio messages saying, oh, I forgot to talk about this. So which portrayal, out of the big three that we've talked about, which portrayal of the Ed Gein character, because that's what they all are, do you like the most, and why?
Leatherface is my, I think, most true to horror villain. And I think he was the right amount of this could really happen and the right amount of this is absolutely absurd. That, and maybe I'm just biased because Texas Chainsaw is one of my classic favorites, but I think he's a good mix, kind of on the left and like the right of the spectrum. And he's got a chainsaw, man. Come on.
What about you, Mary Kay?
I like Buffalo Bill the best.
I was gonna call it.
I think, yeah, of course. I mean, it's one of my favorite movies ever.
I just love Buffalo Bill.
But
the way you say it, just so.
What?
I just love Buffalo Bill. He's my favorite.
I really just love him.
You would give him your sweater willingly?
Oh my God, that's dark. Is this a true crime humor I hear so much about?
This is Ed Gein humor. This is whole genre, subgenre. No, I think I like him the most because we know the most about him without really knowing anything about him.
Yeah.
Also, I feel like that actor is amazing.
Glorious, fantastic job.
He does such a good job in that role. I think it's Ted Levine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ted Levine.
You say it? He's awesome.
Well, I think he felt I feel like I have to pick Psycho because you guys picked the other two, but no, I'm not going to.
Sure.
I'm going to also go with Buffalo Bill. You talked about Leatherface being the perfect balance between believable and absurd. For me, Buffalo Bill hit that even just a little bit more. The scenes I loved with him where when he's telling the girl to put the lotion on the skin and he starts crying, there's part of Buffalo Bill that's saying, this is a girl.
It rubs the lotion on its skin. It does this whenever it's told.
Mister, my family will pay cash. Whatever ransom you're asking for, they'll pay it.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again. Yes, you will, precious. You will get the hose.
Okay. Mister, if you let me go, I won't press charges, I promise. See, my mom is a real important woman. I guess you already know that.
Now it places the lotion in the basket.
Please. I want to go home, please.
It places the lotion in the basket.
I want to see my mommy. Please, I want to see my...
Put the lotion in the basket!
There's little moments where you're like, I could see this guy letting her go if she kept up crying and being you know what I mean? Like, because the humanity there, he can resonate. And that's something that's interesting in the book I'm reading right now, The Dread of Difference, which talks all about gender and horror, is the idea of the monster and the girl, the final girl, the victim. They're a couple shades different. You know what I mean? Like, they're people that feel rejected. They're people that feel like they're kind of in this sterile, like, you know, people only look at me as an object, either an object of terror or an object of sexual desire. And what's interesting is to see Buffalo Bill play that both ways, where he desires to look sexy like this girl that he's going to, you know what I mean? Like when his whole dance in front of the mirror, his desire to be looked at and admired. But then he also is horrified by what he's doing. It plays so many levels. Man, this whole episode about Silence of the Lambs. But I mean, for me, that hits where I could see Ed Gein, having watched the documentary on Silence of the Lambs back, I see Ed Gein sitting there crying, saying, I just want my mom back. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or I just want to be the little girl that would have made my mom proud. I didn't expect Buffalo Bill to be the one that has this emotional center to it, but it's so, and that gives a lot to his performances. Like, you're like, this guy is disgusting, what he's doing. You know what I mean? And then you're also like, there's something so human somewhere in there. It's surrounded by so much darkness and murkiness, but there's that little, when you see a little bit of it come through, it just brings that performance and the movie up huge for me. The one who is pure evil in that movie is Anthony Hopkins' character. Like, he's purely evil. Like, there's no shred of good
psychologist.
there. But Buffalo Bill, you're like, there's something where
there's a shred of humanity.
He went right where most people would have kept going straight, and he just kept following that path down to where he's at. So
I couldn't pick Buffalo Bill because I knew everybody else was gonna. So
you didn't want to be like,
I didn't have anything.
We could have had a
deep to say on
unanimous
Leatherface, so I was
decision.
like, everyone is gonna flip and pick Buffalo Bill. I'm
aesthetically,
gonna go with Homeboy Leatherface.
Aesthetically,
and hope for the best.
I love Leatherface. Like,
I love Leatherface too. But as a sight buff, Buffalo Bill hits a lot of points.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think we've covered a good amount of material.
I think so.
And unless there's anything specific you want to add,
great.
I think I can wrap it up here. I do want to definitely revisit Silence of the Lambs and do like an episode all about that. So maybe I'll hit you guys up when it's time to do that. And the only thing you guys owe me is when you do Devil's Candy, I want to be there. And I want to talk about that movie because I know, like, you might know what the movie's about, but I know what it's about. Like, there's layers to that thing, and I am like a certified Devil's Candy expert. So let's talk about.
You had us on yours. We owe you. We'll have you on ours. You'll be our official Devil's Candy guest.
Awesome. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
www.everythingtryingtokillyou.com. Facebook /Everything Trying to Kill You, and Instagram @Everything Trying to Kill You.
Perfect. Very uniform.
It's just Everything Trying to Kill You all the way down.
Perfect. Okay, well, great. Thank you both so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. This is fun.
Thank you for having us.
I'm going to want to do this again very soon. So, thank you.
Thanks.